All right. So let's move on. And I started the recording. So, one moment. Catering to those of us using Mac. Mm. That is going to be tricky because the first assignment is about hosting. The first assignment is about hosting two web servers on the same machine, right? Um, and the instructions are more specific too, or are based on the assumption that you're sitting on a Windows machine. So we'll have to talk off air about that. Those of you using Mac and or Linux, you'll have to let me know maybe one away so that I can fine tune the requirements of the assignments for you. All right, but we have three already. Okay, all right. Well, we can talk about how best to um work around that. All right. So anyhow, so WAMP server, like I alluded to earlier, WAMP, Apache, PHP, MySQL on Windows. All right. Um, somebody's drawing on the screen. Anyway, WAMP server. So it's a Windows web development environment. Um, so like I said, you just need to download the the um the exe, which is it's free, it's open source, it's free to download, and you install it. So you're actually required for this class, if you haven't already done so, to have Apache server. All right, at least for the first assignment. Um, the alternative to this, and I think if I go to download, you'll see the different options. So I think earlier I said that it may have been on all operating systems. Well, I guess they're staying true to the Windows part of the WAMP, the W. So I'm only seeing it available for Windows. And they do explicitly say that it's a Windows web development environment. All right. So if you have Windows, you can just go ahead and download that. Um, and install it. When you do that, you would end up with, and let me switch my screen real quickly. I'll show you something. When you do that, you should end up with a management portal, a management tool. All right, so I don't have it running right now, but well, you'd see it come up on your desktop here. So I'll just double click. Yes, yes. I just want to show you what you should see in the right. So this W should come up, and you'll see it says local server, none of 3 services running. And then I mean it will come up in the notification bar, and then when you see it turn green, you know that you're running and everything is okay. All right, so all your services and everything are Apache is ready to receive content and such. All right, so that's what you should see if you install WAMP and have it running successfully. I'll soon show you what it looks like when it is not running successfully. All right, so the alternative to WAMP, like Sheldon is saying, is MAMP or XAMPP, or well, R, MAMP and XAMPP. So XAMPP is the X, for me, the X just means any. right? So they didn't want to associate themselves specifically with any OS. So the X just represents that you have XAMPP for Windows, you have XAMPP for Linux, and you have XAMPP for OS X. All right. So XAMPP, for those of you who are not Windows people like myself, you can get XAMPP, and you also have MAMP. So MAMP is true to the M. I think MAMP is specifically, I think there's actually a Windows MAMP. I think there's a Windows MAMP, but MAMP is really for Mac. Right, so there is a Windows MAMP, but you know, it's more specific to Mac OS. All right, so you can get any one of those. I'm not sure what MAMP Pro offers that MAMP doesn't, but I'm pretty sure you don't have any Pro or anything with XAMPP, so you get most features through XAMPP out of the box, and even more so through WAMP out of the box. All right. So you can download and set up either one of those. I'm no Mac or Linux expert, so I really couldn't guide you on that. But I'm sure it's not any tedious. It's not too tedious a process, considering that you would be given instructions on either side. Of course, with the mighty Windows, it's just click, 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 boom. All right. So that's with WAMP. So once again, when you set up WAMP, you're going to see it in your notification section of your application. You just see that, yeah, you have successfully installed it when it turns green. Now, the other one that I alluded to would be IIS. And I'm just going to quickly throw up a window so we can go to see where we would enable IIS. So obviously this is for the Windows users, and I guess we can use a part of the class session to see how we could get, if it's possible to get IIS on Mac and or Linux, which I highly doubt anyway. So from here, what I would want to do is go into Control Panel, and then remove. So you want to turn Windows features on or off, all right? So like I said earlier, IIS is not free in the sense that, well, I mean, you have to pay for Windows. So because you have to pay for Windows, IIS is implicitly not a free product. I think you can download it for free, but at the end of the day, you're downloading it to a Windows machine. And once you have Windows, you pretty much will have IIS. So when you go into Program Files, Programs and Features, and this is Windows 10, so it may look differently in 7 or 8 for that matter. So Programs and Features, turn Windows features on or off, and then you'll see a bunch of modules that you can enable. And one of them is Internet Information Services. All right. So when you expand that, you'll start seeing, I usually just click the box. I think when you click the box, the only thing you may need to check and make sure, because I've seen it not get checked, is this, the management console. All right. So when you check that box, you'll see it's a black square because not everything inside here is going to be selected. All right, so it's going to go through and select what it thinks are major modules, which usually it will do a very good job of selecting them, but sometimes you want to drill down and make sure that like your ASP.NET modules are enabled, your CGI, at least for your personal machine. So based on the application that you're developing and the requirements thereafter, you may want to enable some of those stuff like SSL certificate support, Windows authentication if you need to use some LDAP authentication, whatever it is. But the crux of the matter is you look for Internet Information Services, you tick that, And you just want to make sure under web management tools, you have the IIS management console, and then you can come in here and just make sure you have your ASP.NET stuff ticked off. Sometimes when you try to load a website, if you left off a module, the error message will usually tell you that, oh, you left off your ISAP extensions. So you can go back and just enable it and click OK. And once you click OK, it will run an installation that may last for, I don't know, up to 15 minutes, depending on your machine. All right, so that's how that is done. Now, earlier I alluded to, if you have successfully installed WAMP, then you would see a green W. And I mean, similarly for WAMP, it's not, so sorry, for XAMPP, it's not a W, but you'll see an indication saying that, okay, your services are up and running. And usually you'd see that you have 3 or more services up and running. Now, web servers do not play nicely, and Sheldon has 3, so I'm sure he can confirm what I'm saying. All right, so they do not they do not play nicely. The reason for this, and I'm just going to switch back my screen. The reason for this is that, generally speaking, HTTP traffic broadcasts over over port 80. All right, so sometimes even Skype, based on some configuration, Skype will try to crowd that port 80. And you have other applications that try to broadcast on port 80, but essentially a web server will always default to port 80. All right. Because of that, when IIS is installed on a Windows machine, it is going to establish dominance and say port 80 is mine. I don't care what was on port 80, port 80 is now mine. Apache, poor little Apache running in WAMP, was trying to use port 80 and probably using it successfully, and that's why you would have seen a green W. But then as soon as you enable IIS, you're going to realize that this W, when you shut down your machine and you start to back up, this W is now going to look orange, and then when you hover over it, it's going to tell you 2 of 3 services running. Similarly with XAMPP, it will tell you that fewer than the maximum number of services are running, because Apache is now finding it hard to run because it's pinging port 80 and it's not getting through, it's not getting that traffic it requires. So it's saying that, hey, something is wrong, I can't use port 80. So because of this, it creates a little configuration dilemma. And this is relevant. It's relevant to understand and appreciate this because, like I said earlier, in the scenario, you may be in a situation where you only have one web server, machine, one piece of hardware, but you have to install more than one web server applications to run on it. So like, for instance, myself, I have to teach PHP and I have to teach .NET courses. So I can't afford, when I'm doing my PHP examples in class and I try to run a PHP app, I'm seeing an orange W. And then students going to look at me all cross-eyed like I don't know what I'm doing. Or similarly, when I run my ASP.NET applications, they need to run. So I need to appreciate how the configuration for either one of these applications works so that I can know how to tweak the configurations based on my situation. So WAMP, being open source and nice and what I call malleable, actually most of the configuration files sit in text files. So it's text files. It's not even like, you know, you can install a Windows application and all you see is pure DLLs and encrypted looking files. Most times when you're dealing with open source, there'll be flat text files or XML files that you can just open and change something and save and maybe restart the service, and you would see that that setting is modified, right? So when you click, all right, so when you right click WAMP icon, you should see something like this, and you see WAMP settings and blah, blah, blah. You don't have to trouble any of that. But then when you left click it, you actually see a different kind of context menu coming up, which says restart services, start and stop. And you'll start seeing some other things, and you see localhost. So if you did networking before, you would have known that localhost always refers to the home machine or the host machine right here. So if I click localhost, it will try to browse to. All right, good. So I click localhost on WAMP, right? So remember, WAMP is orange, 12.3 services running, all right? Oh, when you double click, you get a nice info bar. That looks nice. Huh? So anyhow, I clicked localhost on the WAMP server application, but when it loaded up localhost for me, it's loading up IIS Windows. So like I said, IIS, once it's enabled, it's going to commandeer port 80. So I might as well have typed port 80, right? Because all web traffic defaults to port 80 unless otherwise specified, right? And port 80 right now unequivocally belongs to IIS. Cool. Now that poses a dilemma because I need to get to my, my WAMP server administrative panel, which sits at WAMP's local host. So what you usually do is change the port that the web server is looking to broadcast its traffic over so that the ports don't conflict. All right. So once again, port 80 belongs to IIS by default, right? One moment. Yeah, sorry about that. So port 80 is the default. So what you want to do is either you want to change the default of IIS or you want to change the default of WAMP. But the two of them cannot broadcast to the same port, not successfully at least. All right. So I'm a big, huge Windows guy, so I'm going to leave IIS alone. I find IIS quite appealing and nice, but then WAMP being the outside child of web servers on my machine, I have no problem giving it the second class treatment and telling it to look elsewhere for its traffic. So what I would do is go to Apache here, and I can hover over it, and then I would choose the HTTPD conf. So you see I have a number of them, and if you look to the left, you see the emblem that they're all just text files. They're all just text files. All right. So I can just click this one, and then it's going to bring up literally just a text file. Notepad is here. If you have Notepad++, it may open in Notepad++. It doesn't really matter. But the fact is that it's really just text files, hashtag meaning comment, and when you see a line with no hashtag, it's actually a configuration setting. So server signature on, I could just change this to off and save, and that would have changed the configuration file. So the main configuration that I want to change is this one where it says listen. All right. So at the most basic level, you can do a number of things. You can change modules. So like this module listening, before I get to the listen. So you see these modules, load module, and you see some of them commented and some not. If you go back to the Apache here, and then you expand this, you'll see a nice long list of all these modules. All of these modules that you can click here are actually listed in the text file. All right. One moment. Sorry about that. Very sorry. So, where was I? Yes, this is a long list of all the modules. So remember earlier we said you have ASP.NET support through some module. I'm not sure if I have that module here. You see LDAP module here. I don't even know which module. Maybe I would have to download that module manually. All right, but essentially if I click one of these modules and enable it here, it should prompt, well, I've never done it while having the file open, but essentially what you would do, you would just uncomment the line, the config file accordingly. All right, so all you would do is uncomment it. Similarly, if I uncomment this and save it, and then refresh this list, I will now see a tick beside it. So that's how easy it is to change the config file for Apache. Before you do that, I recommend, if you really want to go and tinker with it, you make a backup. So try and find where it is saved on this file system, or you just copy everything into a new file and make a backup. So at least if you mess up anything beyond repair, you can always restore. All right. Anyhow, that's not why we're here. What we're here to do is to change the listening port for our Apache server. So once again, these are the lines. So first time I usually just Control F and just put in 80 because I know that it's listening for 80, and then I find 80, and then I know that that's the line that needs to be changed. Right? So I usually just change this to 81, and then I save, and then I close. Then when I look, I still see it as orange. So what I'll do is restart the services, restart all services, and you watch it go to red, to orange, and then to green. And you're like, yay, it's green again. So now to get to our WAMP localhost, I would type in localhost and the port 81. And then I'll be greeted with my WAMP configuration, server configuration screen. All right. So when you get to this point, you know that, and then you start seeing some error messages. You can ignore those, really. All right, so that's some deeper configuration stuff. All right, so when you get to this screen, you know that you have successfully configured your WAMP server, right? And you see port defined for Apache is 81. Similarly with IIS, I mean, it's already defaulting to 80. I can change that. I think if I look for IIS, or okay, if I have it installed and this is the manager, this would have been that console feature that I said make sure it's enabled. So when you install that, you actually get this nice, wonderful application interface showing all of the features of IIS as it relates to this machine. All right. So to the left-hand side, you'll be able to drill down and you see application pools, and you see all the sites. Usually the very first site of any IIS server is default website, right? You can have other apps underneath. So similar to how with to WAMP, so you guys should have experience with WAMP, at least in terms of posting websites inside of WAMP and browsing to them via localhost. Maybe you never had to change the port before, but that's fine. All right, but oh, well, nothing changes with that. Let me just point that out. So just the same way you would have said localhost / whichever site name or folder name, it's the same thing. So all of these are stuff from my other class. So if I say localhost / and then I say, let's say centrifugal underscore 3.2, and it's still just going to browse to the web app just the same. All right, as long as I have the port. Obviously, if I don't have the port and I try to do that, it's going to give me this error because there is no such site listed in IIS by that name. All right. So obviously that won't work. All right. So yes, sorry. Back to the management portal. So default website. Underneath default website, you can have your web apps and you can have other sites. And just the same way, you can't have two sites broadcasting to the same port 80. So if I create another site, I can't give it port 80. I have to change that. All right. But barring creating a new site, because you won't necessarily do that every day. Let us focus on default site. So if you look to the right, you'll see a few actions. You'll see restart, stop, and you see that I can browse and they specify browse to port 80. All right. I always forget where to go to change this thing. I think it's bindings. All right. So if I change the binding here, HTTP port 80, if I edit this and I change it to, let's say, 8080, 8080, say okay, close. All right. So you see it automatically updates that browse to port 8080 here. All right. So let's see what happens. So now I don't have anything browsing to port 80. Neither IIS nor WAMP is browsing to port 80. So if I say localhost port 80, oh wow, it's still serving up. Yes, I guess IIS really command their port 80. Let's try 8080. And 8080 works just the same. All right. So you can actually change the binding on the IIS if you want. And on that note, let me try something. So I tried 80, tried localhost by itself, and it went to IIS. Let us try changing Apache back to port 80 while we have that binding for port 8080. Yeah, I'm going to restart the server. All right, so let me change this back to port 80. And the port numbers don't, I mean, there's no specification really as to whether it has to be 80. It could be 70. All right, it doesn't really matter in that regard. So let me restart this server. All right, try again. So localhost, still browsing to that. Control F5. I did a Control F5 just now. Okay, so now you can't find localhost at all. Did I restart this? I did not. All right. There we go. So I changed port 8, I changed the configuration file for the Apache back to port 80. And then I changed, and if I look at port 81, it should load to nowhere because there's no web server or anything serving up content there. But the binding on IIS is 8080, so when I look there, I should see IIS. So that is how I allowed WAMP server to retain port 80, and I changed the binding on my IIS server to port 8080. All right. But once again, my favored server to broadcast the port 80 is IIS. So for my purposes, I'm just going to change this back before I forget to do so. All right. So default site, bindings, click HTTP, edit. And I mean, if I'm going too fast for you or if you're missing any steps, once again, the session is being recorded, so you can always review what's taking place and then close. All right. So pretty much that's how you configure that. I think Node.js broadcasts on port 9000, so it has its own port. It makes sure to take one port that it made sure to use a port number that would it would be highly improbable that it interferes with anything else on your machine. That is how old the port number it uses is. If you use like Visual Studio when you run tests, when you debug a web application, it has to fire up an IIS instance. They usually auto-generate some random port numbers, also to ensure that these port numbers probably do not clash with anything else on your machine. All right. So pretty much that is an overview of how you would go about making sure that you have two, or the ability to host two web servers on your machine. Now, a few rules when it comes to website development and web mastery, and these probably never used to be enforced back in the day, but one very important component of this whole thing is please ensure that your first file is called index. All right, so let me just show you the file system real quickly. So to host a site using WAMP server, you want to look for WAMP64. If you install 64-bit, you'll see WAMP64. If you install regular WAMP, you'll just see WAMP. Or sorry, if you install 32-bit, you'll just see WAMP. All right, WAMP64 www. All right. Now, index is the page that every, and I'm going to use every very loosely because everyone that I have come across thus far has looked for the word index or a page called index first. Sometimes it will be index.html, sometimes it will be index.php, but generally speaking, index is the first file it will look for to browse to. So without me having to type out localhost/home or localhost/index.html, it found index automatically. All right, let me just reload with the appropriate port numbers. Cool. Each one found its own index automatically. So like for instance, we're looking at WAMP right now. So if I say index.html, sorry, index.html doesn't exist, sorry. So index.php, yeah, because it's a PHP file, right? PHP file. So index.php, same page. Similarly, if I just browse to localhost, you'll see that it just loads in the same index content without me having to specify. All right. So what does this say? So most of the times when you go to like Amazon.com or Google.com, their web servers would have been configured to look for a specific page, which is usually index, and then browse to that page automatically so that that URL kind of looks clean. And then as you start browsing, you start seeing like about us.html and so on appear in the browser header, right? Similarly with IIS, and Sheldon is alluding to the use of default. So let us explore. So I know default is usually used in IIS. I'm not sure if default is one in in Apache, but I know default is definitely one for IIS and .NET purposes. All right. So I just skipped a step there. I just went a bit quickly. Let me step back a bit. So I should review how to do this in WAMP and let you guys know. But let us focus on IIS for now. So with IIS, you can actually rearrange what you want as the default file for browsing purposes. All right. So with IIS, the files firstly are usually stored in, when you go to your C drive, you'll see inetpub, right? and then you'll see www root. All right, come to the window. Sorry. So yeah. So sorry. So yes. So IIS stores the files in the C drive, on the C drive, and it pub www root. Right. For now, IIS start is the one that it defaults to when you see this nice big pretty blue screen here. Right. That is IIS start. If you look in the IIS control or the IIS manager, you'll see when you click on default website, you'll see this default document option here. When you double click that, it will show you the order in which it will look for the file. So it first looks for default.htm, then ASP, then index, and then it looks for IIS start, and then it finds default. .aspx. ASPX is the extension for ASP.NET files as opposed to ASP, as opposed to raw HTML. All right, but I start is the default. So that means, according to this hierarchy, if I introduce a new file to that same folder, I'm just going to quickly do this. Snap. Really? Tell you about these. I'll say the Mac people going to laugh at me now because Windows have flopped me. All right. Start up a new notepad file. I'm going to say hello world index. If I try to save it, and I think time is running out because we have less than a minute. So by the time I finish saving this file, time would have run out. I'll send one more invitation and we can go for another half hour, and then we can see where that takes us. All right, so just going to kill this session and then we reconvene and then we can call it a night. All right.